Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Catherine Fleming Bruce. I'm speaking to you from Columbia, South Carolina. I am part of an organization called Tnovsa Global Commons. We do politics, culture, historic preservation, and general agitation. So we're so happy to be a part of a community that is doing this work. And today we are so pleased to, in the wake of a great loss of our friend Kevin Alexander Gray, who was so many things, but activist, writer, champion, warrior. And most of us were knocked down by his loss last week. He had a celebration of life yesterday. And one thing that I wanted to have the opportunity to do was to reflect on his written political works, was to reflect on the written record that he has left us through several books and numerous other writings. So these are the things that some of us have never indulged ourselves in. Some of us may have read his books a long time ago, but this is an opportunity for us to track back, look at that work, and project how it can be useful to us in the future. So today we have 4 guests. One of them we're still waiting for, but we have 3 of those guests with us now. So I want to introduce you to them, and I want them to tell you a little bit about how they know Kevin. From there, I think we'll start with our video. Let's introduce you guys, and then we're going to start with the video. So, Ruth, would you like to start?
Sure. I'm Ruth Conniff. I am the editor-in-chief of Wisconsin Examiner, state news outlet in Wisconsin, and the former editor-in-chief of the Progressive magazine, which is how I met Kevin. I edited Kevin when he wrote for the Progressive magazine, and I know him as a writer and a serious intellectual of the left. I just met Catherine actually in person yesterday at his memorial, and I was really moved to see a part of him that I hadn't gotten to know, which was his deep roots in his own community, his barbecue restaurant, his, just deep human connections to other people around him, which really shone through in his writing. So it was interesting for me to get that perspective because he wrote for the Progressive, he wrote for The Nation, he wrote really influential books. He was a really important voice of civil rights and civil liberties in the United States. And he was also a real person, just a very humane, funny, wonderful guy who had friends from every walk of life. And you could really see that in his memorial yesterday, that he touched so many people, and losing him was such a terrible sudden blow. So, but I really like about Kevin that I think he embodies a lot of the most important values of the progressive movement, and that he was both a very important thinker and writer, and also just a really humane person who had the most important thing to him was his connections to other people. And that was really the root of his politics. And that was the beautiful thing about him.
That's so great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Ruth. Greg, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to Kevin?
Okay. My name is Greg Ivers. I'm a professor of government at American University. And Kevin and I first crossed paths when he was in our graduate program, I want to say in the late 1990s. And I remember meeting him specifically when I was department chair. We had some common interests. And then while Kevin was there, Kevin was a person that if he decided that he wanted to be friends with you, then he just went ahead and moved in. It was one step short of dealing with a mobster. It's like, I'm your friend now, and this is how it's going to be. And Kevin would stop by my office and he would talk. And we were both much younger. I'm just a few years younger than Kevin, but I was struck at just the depth and breadth of what he knew as a writer, as a thinker, as an organizer. as a campaign professional, every conversation, another layer got peeled back about Kevin's professional life. And then he left the program really because I don't think it had anything to teach him. And Kevin was, as Ruth was mentioning, Kevin's strength of strengths was his ability to connect with people. Didn't matter where you came from, didn't matter how tall you were, how short you were, where you were in the community. Kevin found a way to connect with everyone. He could connect with paupers and he could connect with princes. And Kevin and I just stayed in touch over the years when he went back to Columbia. And we would talk every now and then. I'd get a random call out of the blue from Kevin about something and we'd chat. He'd come up to Washington, we'd chat. And we got reconnected personally a few years back when I began this project. And I was in Charleston interviewing Dave Dennis.
And the project is?
Dave Dennis, the Julian Bond Oral History Project.
Yes.
And I was interviewing Dave Dennis about Dave's life and his connection to Julian. And I told Kevin that I was going to be down there. And he said, okay, I'll come over and I'll do it with you. Didn't say, do you need me? Let's get together. I'll come over and do it with you. And sure enough, I'm sitting at Dave Dennis's dining room table and there's a knock on the door and there's Kevin Gray. And during the course of the interview, I'm learning all these things about Kevin, about how important SNCC was to him when he was growing up and how influential Julian was to him as a writer and a thinker and an intellectual, and how in many ways Julian was a role model for Kevin. Mm-hmm. So later, when I was thinking about, well, how do I connect generations in this project? Kevin just was a logical choice to interview. So literally a year ago, the end of February of 2022, I came down to Columbia, interviewed Kevin in his restaurant, as those of you who saw the video know, brought my daughter with me, who had just graduated from college and just sat there enraptured, for the afternoon. I mean, the afternoon, what we were with Kevin. And it was just a remarkable experience. And so to me, getting Kevin on record and hearing him have an opportunity to talk about his life and how his experience informed his intellectual trajectory, but he never strayed away from actually helping people and connecting with people. And more so than anybody I've ever known that has passed through my university, Kevin has had more impact on public intellectual life, political organizing, and politics of anyone. And he's just a remarkable, remarkable person. And I'm glad we're here to remember him.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Greg, for saying yes to this. We did get John in. Hey. So we're glad to see you, John. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your connection to Kevin.
Well, I'm honored to join you and honored to join everyone here. Some of us were in Columbia yesterday for Kevin's remarkable memorial service, as well as for all of the fellowship surrounding it. And it was a testament to him that the place was packed. And there were so many people with so many memories, as Greg suggests, of his connection with people across lines of economic, racial, social, regional distinction. He was a remarkable man in this regard. And my memories of him, of course, are rooted in the Jesse Jackson campaigns. And as many people will reference today, Kevin was very young when he came to the Jackson movement, but he was already very experienced. And in many other similar movements, I think there would have been a caution about giving someone who was so young and also who was not a professional campaign manager per se, responsibility for the critical state of South Carolina in that 1988 campaign, the classic Rainbow campaign that really broke things open for our politics. And the striking thing was that the confidence that Reverend Jackson and others, many others, Frank Watkins, Steve Cobble, put in Kevin was rewarded. Obviously, Kevin's work in South Carolina became part of that remarkable Southern strategy of the Jackson campaign, a faith that if you took a candidacy preaching economic and social and racial justice into Southern states, and you reached out to Black voters as well as to liberals who hadn't had a candidate, hadn't had somebody that they could put their faith in, that it would work. And it did. Jackson had those breakthrough wins across the South. And those victories, I think, had a profound impact on certainly the Jackson campaign, but also on the ongoing rainbow. And this is a big deal. The rainbow didn't end in 1988. It was a philosophical construct, an idea for how you would do a politics that stitched together people from all sorts of different backgrounds, but who had a shared faith in economic and social and racial justice, in saving the planet, and in promoting peace. And Kevin was integral in doing something that was very difficult, but also incredibly inspiring. And that was to, I think somebody might be working on something. It's a little project on the sideline here. I'm hearing a bit of noise off to the edge. But anyway, Kevin was very, very able in putting together the public and the human outreach. So you had this philosophy, you had this notion of something you wanted to accomplish. Kevin took it to the people. He took it into small towns, into urban neighborhoods, and built a faith in the rainbow that lasted beyond that campaign, and certainly laid the basis for future campaigns in South Carolina and nationally. And I can tell you that as somebody who traveled in Kevin's circles for many, many years, one of the striking things was that he and Steve Cobble, his dear friend, whose picture I noted in the program at the memorial, he and Steve Cobble were brilliant political strategists. They were brilliant thinkers about how to do politics right. And yet they never were the ones who jumped to the front of the line. They never came into a room and said, okay, everybody, listen to me. Here's what we're going to do. Rather, they would often, and I saw it so many times, they would stand in the back of the room. They wouldn't make a big deal. But slowly you'd see everybody who knew about politics kind of coming toward them and saying, kind of leaning up next to them and saying, well, what do you think about this? And it over time developed that Steve and Kevin were both people that folks around the country turned to when they wanted just deep political insight, when they wanted to know how to respond, not just to a political campaign, but also to an issue, a challenge. And I'll close off by saying that, to my mind, where Kevin did this most brilliantly was in some of the most difficult territory, and that was in opposing wars and in speaking out against militarism and against imperialism, against colonialism. And Kevin was ready to step up and make those statements, to express those views, and also to strategize about how to have success in doing so. Now, by the nature of it in the Democratic Party, that didn't get him a lot of awards, right? I mean, people weren't thrilled when there was somebody who was saying, yeah, let's take the controversial stand, let's take the bold stand, let's do the right thing, even though it may be politically challenging. And so Kevin never, ended up as, like one of these high-flying folks, jetting around in Washington or going to LA. And he did that, but he wasn't somebody who was hired on to the big campaigns. Rather, he was somebody who always maintained his connection to the grassroots. And so grassroots working class advocates had a strategist who could move in the circles of, who had the knowledge of one of the top campaigners, one of the top political theorists in the country. What a remarkable gift that was. How amazing it was for people in Columbia and in South Carolina and far beyond South Carolina that they had a friend, an ally, a comrade who was there for them and who brought so much knowledge, so much skill, and so much humanity to the process. And I guess finally I'd say so much sense of humor. Because Kevin was funny.
Thank you. Thank you
Great.
so much, John Nichols with the Nation. We appreciate your being here today. And our last panelist is Norman Stockwell. So please, Norman, tell us a little bit about yourself and about your engagement with Kevin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Pleased and honored to be here. I'm the publisher of the Progressive magazine, which is a 114-year-old national political magazine here in Madison, Wisconsin. And Kevin was, I mean, when John talks about Kevin being a strategist and an advisor, he was certainly that for us at the Progressive. He regularly wrote things for us for our Progressive Media Project, which sends out op-eds all across the country. We featured interviews with him in the magazine and on our website. But he was also part of this little group of people. I think Ruth was the one that named it our kitchen cabinet, but a group of advisors that helped keep us on track and keep us looking in the right direction about where the Progressive as a magazine should be going moving forward in the 21st century. And that I think was very helpful and very important to us. He also came and spoke at our annual Fighting Bob Fest event. And we have a little 5-minute video of that really, I think, illustrates a lot of what all of the other panelists have said already, both about Kevin's sharp political sensibility, but also his humor and his way of connecting with people. So maybe we could show that right now.
Okay, hang on a second. We got that up and ready to roll.
Stop or I'll shoot. And that's not just a sadistic cop, that's the government talking to you. Stop or I'll shoot. Stop or I'll kill you. Do what I said at the point of this gun or I will kill you. That's what it's about, the death penalty, expanding the death penalty to cops, expanding the death penalty to stand your ground on the street to some person that has a license to kill granted to them by the government. We've got to understand those issues. And we've got to organize locally to fight back. We've got to organize those citizen review boards that have power to bring people to court, to punish people who are sadistic and who kill people because they can. It's tough when you're pulled over for a police stop and your life is in danger because you have a busted tail light, or your life is in danger because you made an illegal U-turn, or your life is in danger because somebody thinks that a nigger is an animal and I can kill him and get away with it because nobody's going to say anything. And the police are always right. And we send the police out to investigate the police. And most of the time, 99% of the time, the police come back and say it was a justified kill.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's our culture of violence from the top to the bottom. And we can't just, as I said, we can't just say to those police walking the streets, and we've got to respect, because we're peace people, we're progressive. We're trying to respect the humanity of those people that are supposed to be keeping the peace, not law enforcement, keeping the peace. Because if people don't respect the law, no amount of forcing them to respect it at gunpoint is going to do. People have to respect the fairness of the law. They have to respect the fairness of those that enforce the law. And it doesn't have to be all about a gun. So when we go out this fall, we ought to demand those politicians, first of all, to say, revisit this idea as it relates to police violence, that it ought to be always shoot to kill. We need to take that power from the police. At the national level, we ought to demand that politicians ought not be so quick to take us to war.
Mm-hmm.
And we ought to hold all of them accountable and not give anybody a pass. We ought not think that just because President Obama, and he's got a nice wife and a nice family and they look good, black guy, he might do better, he might understand something. Well, I know a lot of black politicians that follow that corporate line, that believe that money is power, that believe that they're putting power for Wall Street, that they're putting power for the people that have the money and the control. We've got to hold them accountable. If we have to go to general strikes and sit out working, if we have to do like the people in Ferguson and block the interstates, if we have to fight back against the police and stand and say no more, If we've got to do what y'all did in Wisconsin, we were so proud of everybody that went down to the state capitol in Wisconsin. Getting back in South Carolina, seeing Matthew get arrested and seeing people singing in the state capitol, that brought a lot of hope to a lot of people. Wisconsin means something to somebody from South Carolina who lives in the heart and soul of the Confederacy, who lives in a state where every street is named after a Confederate hero, in a state where a Confederate flag flies on the State House, in a state where people are proud that they succeeded from the Union, that the street that runs in front of the State House is named Robert E. Lee Highway. We were proud to see the people of Wisconsin stand up and lead the progressive movement. I want y'all to continue to lead that movement, continue to be the champions that you are. I'm so thankful that Matthew invited me to be here today. It's kind of cold here. Yeah, I know it's warm. I joked on the way. I understood why slavery lasted so long because it's cold up here. And I invite y'all to be side by side with me in this movement that we're going to build. It's movement time. It's movement time in this country. It's movement time. It's time to get back in the streets. It's movement time. It's time to rebuild coalitions. It's time to rebuild multiracial coalitions. It's time to rebuild multi-issue coalitions. It's movement time. It's movement time. Power to the people.
And that recording from our annual Fighting Bob Fest, that one in 2014, but Kevin came more than once, but that was, I think, so powerful and so prescient and such a message that we need to hear today.
Excuse me, I have somebody to turn down.
I went to his funeral, and I don't disconnect the culture and music from the movement. And
oh, I'm sorry. That's me doing that.
How things progress.
I'm sorry.
Idea of Black consciousness and James's role in it. Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. I say I'm still Black, and I'm still Black because James Brown said you could say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. Not I'm a Negro and I'm proud, or I'm an African. I mean, it's cool if that's what people want to do, but Black is cool.
Now I have to stop the share. That's. Hold on a second.
Breaking with convention, War, Peace, and the Presidency, covering
Kevin there in the background speaking on Laura Flanders' program, Grid TV, and on Amy Goodman's program, Democracy Now!, both places where he was also a regular guest being interviewed, particularly around political convention time.
He also praised Obama for working with Republicans over the past 4 years.
One of the main reasons we ought to re-elect President Obama is that he is still committed.
I think if you just close that tab, it'll shut off.
I'm trying to find the tab. I'm sorry, everyone. I gotta find the tab.
Well, I'll talk for a second while Catherine is finding the tab on the video. This really, Kevin was such a resource to so many of us in the progressive movement. And as you can see, national programs like Grit TV, like Democracy Now!, the Progressive Magazine, where you can find his writing online at our website, progressive.org, and all of the different groups that he helped out, as John and Ruth were talking about, and the oral history interviews that Greg described. I think just the resources that he has left for us are so precious.
Meanwhile, keep talking while she resolves her problem.
I'm sorry. I think I got it
set.
resolved.
I think we're all set.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, we threw that in at the last minute, so I apologize for adding that layer of difficulty to this wonderful Zoom event today.
Well, we got to hear a lot more that gives us some background, so that's good in a way.
If I can add
Right.
one more, if I could throw one more thing in here too, And very
Yes.
quickly, it's just one of the things that you note there is that Kevin was from the South. And that, as you noted in his speech that he gave in Wisconsin, and it was so very vital to have Kevin as an outspoken Southern progressive, because when he came to northern states, when he came to Wisconsin, it was inspiring, and it was good to know that there were people who were holding up the banner in South Carolina, in a place where it wasn't easy. And really, in many ways, Kevin made our progressive movement a national movement. He was essential to doing that. Not alone. Kevin would always say he's got a lot of people with him, or he would have always said that. But he did so much to remind national media outlets, national political players, that the whole of the United States had progressive potential. And I think that was a contribution that I particularly valued, because it reminded us to not, kind of narrow our vision and write the South off, as some people do.
Exactly. And thanks everyone for giving me that corner of grace. I appreciate it. And I'd like to move to our discussion specifically about Kevin's written works.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that there are 3 major books that he did and a variety of other writings. So we want to focus on those major works with some additional comments about any of the publications that you all helped to do. So why don't we start with the first book, with Waiting for Lightning to Strike. And we can spend a little time on that. So anybody who wants to jump in on not only the process of getting it done and how y'all supported as institutions and publications making that happen, but what does Waiting for Lightning to Strike tell us today?
I'd like to go, Catherine, if you don't mind, because I'm
Sure.
going to have to leave a little bit earlier than some of the other panelists. And I worked with Kevin on writing that he did around that book.
Mhm.
And in fact, I think the speech that Norm pulled out actually came in part from that book. But what Kevin did, which I think is so incredibly timely and important right now, was to connect the history of the United States of America, Black history, and what's happening, the problems that we confront today. So in one, I was just this morning looking at a piece that he did for the Progressive that came out of that Fighting Bob speech, where he very specifically, he was talking about Colin Kaepernick and the, controversy over his taking a knee to protest police violence against Black people. And he began with the little known second verse to our national anthem. And this is also in Waiting for Lightning to Strike, but he talks about how the third verse of the national anthem concerns the hunting down of enslaved people who were promised freedom when they joined the British side of the War of 1812. And it goes like this: no refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave, and the star-spangled banner in triumph doth wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. And he goes on to talk about how the same root problem that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. organized against until his death, he talked about the problem of racism, the problem of economic exploitation, and the problem of war are all tied together, as King said, the triple evils. And that was really at the heart of what Kevin contributed with that book, Waiting for Lightning to Strike, and in his other writings, was pulling together the history of the United States, the history of slavery and the oppression of Black people as absolutely integral to economic oppression and the ongoing police state. And his work for the ACLU, his civil rights work, it was, pulling together this coalition, which Nichols has really, beautifully described and witnessed in the Rainbow Coalition. But it was this multiracial effort to say, we need to stand with the people, not the powerful. And these things are intertwined. And there's a reason why, we're hearing so much about stamping out history lessons in schools. And, Kevin was a historian in addition to other things. And he talked about the significance of US history, the racism that was deeply embedded, inextricable from the way we set up our country from the very beginning, and the need to confront that. And in confronting that, you confront this entire entire power structure, and that, you know, the economic injustice and the social injustice are inseparable from one another. And that's why we're hearing so much about critical race theory, an obscure academic phrase that, you know, has somehow become the major Republican talking point, because it is absolutely at the center of this unjust power structure that we're living under. And Kevin articulated that so beautifully, and it was powerful, and it was important. And he brought together the people who got out in the street to oppose the Republican governor of Wisconsin, Scott Walker, when he took away labor rights here, and the civil rights movement in the South. And he just brought all of that together seamlessly and inspired people. So I feel like that was the Waiting for Lightning to Strike is something that people should be reading right now as we're talking about critical race theory and the history of the United States and what it really means.
And I should note that there was a question about where to find Kevin's books. So thank you so much, Norman, for putting the links in the chat. So please check those links out to be able to find, and hopefully all of them are still in print. I'm not so sure about the second one, The Decline of Black Politics, but certainly I've seen the other two around. So any other comments about the Waiting for Lightning to Strike?
If I can just throw in one thing, I think it's really important to understand or recognize how far ahead of the curve Kevin was. Because as Ruth suggests, he was writing about ideas and approaches, basically putting together a critique and analysis that is only now, even as we speak, becoming broadly accepted, right? And one of the things that he wanted people to understand is that the Black experience was an experience that defined Black politics, right? And that it didn't, Black voters were not just, voters of the moment. They were voters who had a history, and that history led them to vote with a much deeper sophistication than I think a lot of pundits and a lot of political analysts gave credit for. There's often a suggestion, well, Black voters are overwhelmingly Democratic in their voting. And yes, that is true. But as Kevin recognized, that there were historic examples of where Black voters broke with the Democratic Party to challenge it from within, sometimes from without, and brought a great sophistication to that struggle. And that sophistication was rooted in a shared knowledge of long-term oppression, 400 years of oppression. And what he wanted to do was to make sure that white political activists and people across the board understood that and recognized that there was a lot to this. It wasn't just a simplistic politics. This was a deep and meaningful politics. And that if people understood that, right, if they understood the roots of that oppression and began to attack those roots of oppression in all forms of violence, then you could ultimately begin to change society in fundamental ways. So his was a very tightly focused analysis that then expanded into a broad call for action. And as you saw in that Wisconsin speech, which, as Ruth notes, is very related to his book, he really was speaking to people and saying, let's put all these pieces together. And if we put these pieces together, and if we put the rainbow together, if we build this broad coalition, we can actually make real progress. Not progress of just one program or one spending bill or something like that, but systemic change that might actually allow us as a country to get beyond a past that we cannot forget, but we can grow from.
Yes, that's excellent. Thank you for that. Norman, do you have a comment that you want to add on this?
Well, I mean, I think that John touched on it there. Just that so much of what Kevin said, both in his writing and also in the various interviews and speeches that we heard some segments of there, really was so prescient. When he was talking about these issues in 2012 or 2014, or even going back to his critique of the Obama campaign in 2008, those kinds of analyses are just so relevant today, and so much in currency as we're speaking about these issues in 2023. So.
Right. And Greg, I
Mhm.
wanted to ask you about your oral history work with
Mhm.
Kevin. So on the one hand, we have his written works,
Right.
but what you do is also going to be in a repository,
Right.
but a little different. So why
Mhm.
was it important to collect these oral histories and to have Kevin in an oral history?
Oh gosh. I know that we're tight on time. So just whenever, hit the gong when you need for me to stop. As I mentioned before, Kevin and I are, a few years apart, but we grew up very differently. I'm a native Atlantan, and I was in Atlanta until I went to college. And when I came back from college, I went to graduate school at Emory for my advanced degrees. Kevin and Kevin and I always felt this was a karmic moment because in 1986, Hosea Williams and some other people in Atlanta organized a demonstration in Forsyth County, which, as some of you know, had been historically white since about 1910, 1915, when the white population of Forsyth County, which is just north of Atlanta, and today is a very popular place for people that have lake homes and second homes and things like that. Forsyth County, literally through lynching, through terror, drove out its Black population and literally had remained all white for the next 70 years. And I was in graduate school, and a friend and I decided that we wanted to go up and be part of this demonstration. And we kind of knew enough, we thought, that we needed to, tread carefully. Hosea Williams was very much of a magnet of publicity in Atlanta, and not always for the right reasons, but this was something that was very important. So we go up there as part of this, and we see there are lots of law enforcement vehicles, but we see lots of trucks and lots of big cars and lots of guns. And we see the police kind of siding up to the people with guns, and it's all a big joke to them. And it was terrifying because here we are in 1986, and the police were not there to protect us. And finally, the police sort of said, look, you need to go. We can't guarantee your safety. This became a huge story. And then a few weeks later, we went back. And this time, John Lewis was there, Julian Bond was there, all the icons of the old days were there. And the press coverage changed dramatically. And the story of Forsyth County as a formerly all-white county changed dramatically. Well, Kevin was at the demonstration as well. And when I was interviewing Kevin for my work, he was just going through his restaurant. And for those of you that didn't have the pleasure have not had the pleasure of going, Kevin's restaurant is a museum.
Yes, it is.
It's a museum that serves
Absolutely.
barbecue. I don't think of it as a barbecue joint that's kind of decorated really, great. I think of it as a museum that serves food, and very good food at that. And Kevin and I also later found out that we were both mutually barbecue snobs, and that was another connection. But Kevin's showing me, goes, oh yeah, this is in 1986. This is over in Forsyth County. And I'm like, damn, I was there. And wouldn't you know it, I actually saw myself in the picture. I remembered what I was wearing. I remember that was me. It's not from the front, but I can tell from the side. I can tell who I was standing next to. That was me. And then Kevin and I started talking about this. And I remember telling him, like, this was a really terrifying moment. And in so many ways, it shaped my view of things. And I thought I had a fairly sophisticated view for being all of about 25 years old at the time. And Kevin said to me, Brother Greg, this is how Black folks lived every minute of every day, afraid of something. And the fact that Kevin was never afraid of anything was, part of his appeal to me as a person. And so again, when I was thinking about why it was important to document Kevin is probably the least well-known, most important public intellectual, political organizer, and campaign professional of the last 50 years. He is sort of like the musician's musician. Everybody knows who he is if you know him. Everybody knows how important he is if you know him. Everybody knows his significance if you know him, but that's if you know him. Because Kevin never, as everybody else has mentioned, Kevin never looked for the spotlight. The spotlight navigated to him. He was an extraordinarily charismatic person, and he could hold a room just like very few people I've ever known could. But one of the things that we talked about was the need for intergenerational transfer of knowledge. That I teach students now who know who Rosa Parks is, who know who Martin Luther King is. They kind of know who John Lewis is, but that's where it ends. And so in the courses I teach, I'm filling in a lot of cracks in the sidewalk, as I used to describe to Kevin. And these are people that didn't understand that the movement wasn't just a couple of fiery speeches and then white people clinging to their pearls and deciding that, enough was enough. That no one concedes power unless forced to concede power. And to see the struggle now mirror in some ways the struggle of generations ago, it's about power butting up against power. The people that want to share power. And Kevin was never a dominant person. He believed in sharing power with people and across lines. He never sought to be the boss. He didn't want a movement that said, okay, I'm in charge now. He said, I'm a small D Democrat. Everybody has something to contribute. Everybody's got something to say. Everybody has a gift to give. And I felt it was important for younger people, particularly, but then everybody more generally, to understand that here is Kevin Gray, a grown-ass man, 65 years old, who was telling a story about, as a young man, being influenced by SNCC, by being influenced by the great leaders and organizations of his formative years, and seeing that the power of the pen could be as important as the power of bodies in the streets. And that's the one thing I think that all four of us on this panel have seen in Kevin, even though we come from different places. Kevin believed in the power of words. He believed in the power of ideas, but he was also an empiricist. Kevin believed that the world was based on how the world really was. He wasn't a person who fantasized about a world that could exist. He understood the world the way it was. And when we talk about ACLU related stuff, I think John was mentioning how the Black political experience, and Ruth, they were mentioning, the Black voter and coming from different places and so many white voters. Well, in thinking about what parts of the Constitution mean, there's the dominant way of thinking about it in the world I used to be more tightly tied to is, well, what do the words mean? And we see it now. What did this person mean in 1791? And what did this person mean in 1831? And my position is, who cares? Constitutional interpretation is not an exercise in ancestor worship. That you can have people in comfortable positions deciding what words mean to them, or you can have people deciding the lived experience of what those words have done to them. So you can look at a Charles Hamilton Houston who used the Constitution as a document to create change and said, if a lawyer is not a social engineer, then he or she is a parasite on society. And that using law to protect the status quo was something that Kevin understood. So when people immediately retreat to these words like originalism or the intent of the framers, they're trying to retreat to a status quo ante that says things were fine the way they were. And everybody who's butting up against that is either a radical, doesn't like America, or has some kind of hidden alternative agenda. And for Kevin to explain these things the way that he could across generational lines, he was wonderful with young people, whether they were college-age students or in the case when he spoke to an organization my daughter was involved in when she was in high school. 15 and 16-year-olds. I mean, Kevin could connect with a 15 and a 16-year-old, no matter what background they came from. And then he could sit down with elders and be respectful, but say what he had to say. So I think as a person who believed that the movement, the Southern Civil Rights Movement, has never received the attention that it deserves, and that the people who were, quote, everyday people, the people who decided in the spring of their freshman year or sophomore year to stop whatever they were doing and to go down south, to jump on a bus and be part of the Freedom Rides, to go to Alabama, to go to Mississippi, to do this kind of work. It's a remarkable story. So people need to know who these people were, who weren't the famous people in the headlines. Kevin is a person that people need to know, because he was sometimes in the headlines, but more often than not, he wasn't. He was in the background. He was on the street. He was a man of roots. So I think that Kevin, being so talented, I used to call him my griot. He was my storyteller. And we've left that part out. Kevin was an incredible storyteller, a great raconteur. I mean, Kevin could tell stories, but, he could take a really complex idea and he could tell it in a way that was digestible, but you had no idea that you were getting this incredibly complex way of thinking in a way that was so palatable and so smooth and so drawn to his charisma that it would take you a while to realize what you were learning.
Well, thank you for that. I want to point out that we have put in a link to the Julian Bond Oral History Project, American University, in the chat. So that is an opportunity to go and look at that interview for yourself. And I hope people will do that and share that interview as we are sharing these books.
Well,
so
Catherine, I'm going to speak in our common tongue. Appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to, once again, I want to make sure I named these 3 books that I want everybody to try to get a hold of and read. One is the first one that we mentioned, Waiting for Lightning to Strike. And I think that was 2008, if I'm not mistaken. The next one is The Decline of Black Politics. And the last one is Killing Trayvon's an Anthology. So if there's any comment on any of those other 2 books, because we talked a little bit about Waiting for Lightning to Strike, if anyone wants to jump in and talk about the Killing Trayvon's or The Decline of Black Politics, this is a moment.
Can I just, because I will have to go soon, I just wanted to say, Killing Trayvon's is a good example because it's an anthology, so it's not all Kevin's writing, but it is a pulling together of a global explanation of sort of the connection between violence against Black people and the police state that reinforces that, and this broader politics, and putting that in a broader political context. And what I wanted to add to what Greg was saying, which he said so beautifully about sort of how Kevin illuminated these connections, that he had this incredible ability to go back to the War of 1812 and to link it to personal anecdotes. For example, an anecdote that he told about driving in a car with, I believe it was Joanne Wipajewski, actually, of The Nation, but it was a white woman being pulled over by a police officer and having the police officer look at him and say to Joanne, "Ma'am, are you transporting this man?" So the live reality of our terrible history in the United States and how it, connects to people's personal experience, to bring that all to light. It was just an amazing talent that Kevin had as a writer and as a speaker. And so it's like that, those human little anecdotes from his own life, from other people's lives. I mean, he would recount these stories of these terrible moments in which an individual police officer, Black or white, was an instrument of this systemic injustice. And to explain, this is not just one person. This is not just sort of, outing people for their individual bias and racism. This is a system that we're all living under, and people find themselves in that system as either victims or agents of oppression. And he just had an incredible ability to show that and to tell these compelling anecdotes that really personalized it. And I think that was a gift and something that is really useful to people today to take a look at that and really think about. And it expanded, of course, beyond, in his piece for The Progressive, which I put in the chat, The Bully Empire, it expanded beyond domestic politics to international politics and the way in which the United States oppresses other countries and other peoples, because it's part of this systemic injustice that we have to confront if we're going to make change. And I think fundamentally that was the message in Kevin's books. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yes.
I'll throw in one more thing coming off of what Ruth said, and that is that Kevin loved politics. He enjoyed politics, and he didn't see it as a chore, although it often was. It often required a lot of him. But I think that one of the things that came through from all of his books was a desire to get people more engaged with it and to understand. He actually had a great faith in the possibilities of politics. The desire to get people more engaged with the small d democratic struggle so that they would organize, mobilize, vote, and then act beyond voting day, show up for meetings, show up for rallies, show up for events. And I think that what he really kind of desperately wanted to do was to give people hope that if they just kept at it, they could actually make fundamental changes. And one of the things that we talked about a lot, and we would talk on the phone sometimes for hours, and which I think Greg laughs because that was Kevin's skill set, was a long conversation. And we would talk for hours, and we'd begin with some very weighty topic, like stopping a war, achieving economic justice, or getting somebody elected president, or something like that. And then he would end up telling me, and I bet you it's probably true for most people on this call, telling a story about going to the hardware store. Because he was always going to the hardware store to get something for the restaurant, right? Or he was always constructing something or doing something. They'd go to the hardware store, and he would be confronted by everyday racism, right? By, somebody who maybe they didn't know, or maybe they did, but would say something that was offensive. And these are people that Kevin dealt with on a daily basis, right? Or on a frequent basis. And he was always thinking, he would always talk to me about this. He was thinking always about, how do I confront that, right? How do I bring this person forward? How do I get them out of where they're at? This is talking about white people, right? And moving the discussion to a better place. And from Kevin's standpoint, from Kevin's standpoint, that was a political act, right? He didn't give up on people. He actually saw that, when you're in a difficult situation, you don't run away from it. You don't treat it casually. You try to figure out what are the tools you have to address this immediate moment, but in the broader sense, to address the system. And I think on almost every basis and almost every circumstance, if you're reading his books, if you heard his speeches, if you were with him, at any event or conversation, he brought this wonderful combination of historical knowledge, intellect, political skill, and humor, and a gentleness. He actually would modulate it, right? Sometimes he could be very tough and very strong, but other times it would be a gentle use of humor to try and get people to the next spot. He never wanted to close the conversation down. He wanted to open it up. And he was always thinking about it. And somebody said, Greg had that wonderful phrase that he's the most under-recognized, political, I'll go further and say political genius of our time. But he was also, he's probably a little bit under-recognized as a psychiatrist and a psychologist and a sociologist. You know what I mean? He really did think about how to get into people's heads and make them be better than themselves or more than themselves. And he lived to be 65 years old, which is not very old.
No.
But, I guess the thing I wrestle with at this point is this question of whether you can replace him. And I don't know that you can. I'm going to be very, honest about it. He was a unique figure And I am so sorry that we're not going to have another 25 or 30 years of Kevin Alexander Gray bringing these skills to our politics. And I know that it's our responsibility today and going forward to keep his books in circulation,
Yes.
to keep those videos being shown, Norm, to keep talking about him, Greg and Ruth and all the other folks on this call, so that we can at least keep as much as possible of that remarkable spirit and that remarkable faith alive. And I guess that's a part of our mission going forward.
And I don't think
I just want to say, I have to go, but I just want to say this is wonderful. I'm so grateful to you for letting me participate in honoring Kevin. He is just a really important person. And shout out to John Nichols, who was willing to road trip down to the memorial yesterday at the last minute. We had a very fast trip, but it was really meaningful. And I'm really glad to connect with everybody else who was influenced by and loved Kevin. So
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for saying yes and be a part of what we're doing here today. I'm so glad to meet you in person. I was glad to have that opportunity. And again, we will have this recording available to continue to share. So thank you for joining us.
thank you.
Now we are going to wrap things up.
I just wanted to jump in for 1 second, because I think that we've kind of given the barbecue part a little bit of short shrift. And although Greg mentioned it, and
Greg's doing his job duty.
The whole role of sitting down in conversation with people, all the things that John was just talking about, really a lot of that happens around food. And I think that that's really important as well. Jim Hightower talks about the chat and chew. And really that's, barbecue is really an essential way of connecting with people in sharing ideas and building that kind of common understanding and common language that helps us move forward. So I don't think we can give short shrift to that when Kevin chose to open a barbecue restaurant, he had that in mind. So
Exactly. And
Kevin?
yes, it is a wonderful place.
Catherine, I'm sorry. I just want to add a couple of things. Number one, I'll get to the barbecue second, but John talking about the way that Kevin worked. I was thinking about Kevin this morning in preparation for this, but then when I read the New York Times piece about this young woman in South Carolina who's being punished for not pledging allegiance to the flag. So on the New York op-ed page, I think it's Pamela Paul has a piece, and she's a 15-year-old girl somewhere in South Carolina who was disciplined for refusing to salute the flag. And I'm thinking, this is 80 years old, literally. I mean, there's no case here, right? But interestingly, there becomes this discussion about what is patriotism. And to me, Kevin was a patriot.
Oh, yeah.
He was a person, he was an institutionalist. He wasn't there to blow up banks. He wasn't there to assault the Capitol. He wasn't there to climb the White House fence. Kevin believed in the power of knowledge. He believed in the Constitution and said, okay, I have First Amendment rights and I'm going to use them. He believed in the 14th Amendment. He says, I have rights and I'm going to use them. He believed in the 15th Amendment. I have the right to vote and I'm going to use it. He believed that he was no longer part of an enslaved class of people. Kevin believed in American institutions, and he was as much of a patriot as his mentors were in the 1960s. The irony of Martin Luther King Jr. being painted as a communist sympathizer and somebody who hated the United States. King worked through the system, and that was the criticism of him later in his life by younger people, that he wasn't bold enough. And Kevin believed in reasoning with people. Like John mentioned, Kevin would sit you down and reason with you. And Norm talked about Kevin's restaurant. Kevin opened, nobody opens a restaurant at 60 to make money. Kevin opened that business because he was opening a community center that served food. It was all a deliberative act. The way it was decorated, where it was located, literally on the railroad tracks. The back of my shirt says best barbecue on both sides of the tracks. Kevin wanted to open a Black business that was Black owned in the historic Black part of Columbia. That was all intentional, but he welcomed everybody. I was in Kevin's restaurant when the Trumpers would come in and sit down and eat. He wanted them to come in. He wanted them to see what he did. He would talk to anyone about anything. And every time I went to the 2 or 3 times I went to Kevin's place, it was a rainbow.
Yeah.
It was multiracial. It was multi-generational. There were people with out-of-state plates who had come to Kevin's place. And again, that was Kevin in a nutshell, right? You got the museum, but you also got the place to come and talk. And if you just wanted to come and eat a meal, you came and ate a meal. He hired people from the community who were maybe on their last leg.
Right.
He hired people who were recently released from prison. He hired people that he knew needed a job, and he would be very patient with them. He would say to me, no, this one I'm having trouble with, but he needs the job. He's got this and that and the other. So again, he was serving the community in a way that was very different than what people would think of as political organization and community building. I mean, he's just remarkable in that sense. And the food was great and is great. So if you're in or around Columbia, get over there and eat Kevin's food.
Yeah,
that's right. And I think that just captures everything that we want to share. You know, we talked about his writing, we talked about his work, we talked about his restaurant, and all of these give us inspiration and insights that we can use in the ongoing work of improving democracy and providing justice wherever we are. So I think that's the main thing that all of you have helped to communicate today. So I do want to thank you. I know that there are folks who have to get out of here early, so we're going to wrap this up. I want to point you all to the chat because we do have a couple of links that have been put here that give you access to the books, that give you access to the oral history and other ideas. So we'll try to make sure we can provide those links to you later on. Those of you who signed up for this, we'll make sure we get that to you. I appreciate all the comments that are in the links. Some of them are fairly lengthy, so I'm not going to be able to read them today, but I'll certainly try to share them out with everyone. I do want to thank my co-panelists here for saying yes to this request. You know, there are a number of people that we wanted to get, and we got all of you here. So we thank you for being here. John Nichols with The Nation, Norman Stockwell with The Progressive, Greg Ivers with American University, and Ruth Conniff with the Wisconsin Examiner. Thank you all for giving us an opportunity the day after a celebration of Kevin Gray's life to think now we're going into tomorrow. What is our tomorrow? What is our today? And how can everything that Kevin Alexander Gray showed us and left us be useful today, be continuously useful today, and useful tomorrow? Because we still have the work to do. At the end of that clip, he was telling us it's movement time. And it is still movement time, perhaps now even more so than at that time. Certainly here in South Carolina, you know, we see a lot of things as other Southern states show that we still have the work to do, and it is certainly movement time here. So I thank all of you for joining this chat. We had a good population of people who stayed until the end. We always love that. So thank you so much. I will make sure that I thank all of you and send you the link to this event so that you can share it and post it, and that you have all the links here. So with that, I'm going to offer my panelists a closing remark. Why don't we start with Greg? Let's do a quick closing remark to sign off with.
Well, I just want to thank you, Catherine, for organizing this event. I want to thank everyone for attending, and John, Norm, it was a pleasure to meet you. And I wish I could say that to Ruth. I hope our paths will cross again. And I think what I really, I just want to close with saying that Kevin was a remarkable man, and his story needs to be told, and his legacy needs to be acknowledged and remembered. And the best way to do that is to combine the power of ideas with the power of on the ground work.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you.
Norman.
I mean, I'm so honored to be a part of this event and to have had some small connection with Kevin over the years, and to connect with all of you on this panel today. It's really, I don't think that we can understate what John said about, in many ways, Kevin is not replaceable. And yet I think Kevin's own legacy and Kevin's work throughout his life was to make sure that there are many, many more people that have the same ways of thinking, ways of viewing the world, and ways of building for a better tomorrow.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Norma, for being with us today. And John, you're going to close us out.
Well, I appreciate it. And Catherine, thank you. This was so vital, and something that someone had to do, right? We had to have a Zoom like this to talk about it in a deeper way. But you did it, and you did it so well. I really appreciate it, and I love your organizing. I will just say that one of my great heroes has always been A. Philip Randolph, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, who long before the March on Washington that we all saw, called for a March on Washington in 1941 to integrate the defense industries of World War II. Was always at it, was always struggling, and yet when we think about history, we often don't remember him as well as we should. I think of Kevin in a very similar sense, that there's always somebody there who sees the long journey, sees the long struggle, and starts organizing toward it, and never stops making the call. And A. Philip Randolph always said, freedom is never given, it is extracted, it is won. And I will tell you that Kevin Alexander Gray understood that. He understood that, freedom wasn't going to be just handed out. It wasn't going to come easily, but he was more than willing to be involved in that long struggle. And we are so lucky to have had a chance to join him along the way, to see him at work, and to remember him today. And I want to promise you, I'm going to remember him as long as my days last.
Yes, yes. So say we all. So once again, thank you for being on this panel today. Thank all of you for joining us in remembering Kevin and his written political works and his oral histories. We want to remind you to continue to share this link. We're going to have it up, even though it's got that long piece in the middle, which I guess a good person would cut out. But the upside of it was all links of Kevin. So that's kind of cool. I guess he was kind of knocking the walls out, knocking the fourth walls out for us. So with that, I thank you all for being here. We will have this up later today, and I'll get the links to you. And we're going to keep the movement going forward. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Catherine.
Okay.